to investment and growth in the Eurozone. At the moment, European banks are deleveraging further and exacerbating the stagnation of growth. And if they had more capital, they could do the opposite of that. And so I think we stand by that view that European banks would benefit from capital. Private capital would be the best place to start if we could get more capital into European banks. And failing that, there is a case for some public intervention.
Okay. Before I open up the question to the audience, which I will do in a minute, I have one more question on the EFSF. We need to, one of the questions that people are debating at the moment is how to leverage it. Should be granted a banking license? Should there be some other form of leveraging? It is clear that the EFSF in its current form, even after the changes are approved, cannot deal with this. What is the panel's view on how this could be done, how this should be done, and how important it is for as a crisis resolution framework? Are there any ones who like to?
Why don't you start with George? He has best experience on this.
Happy. I'll talk to you as well.
That was a good way of reflecting on it.
George.
Well, I think there are several avenues that are being explored. Turning the EFSF into a bank is one. Making it function as an insurance company could be another one. Using it as providing the first tranche of a guarantee, thereby relieving the pressure on the others, could be yet another one. So I think that there are a number of options, and I'm glad that they are all being explored because something needs to be done.
Ollie, if I can come to you, are we going to have this at the end? What is your estimate of the process? Is there going to be one of those options that are being discussed? And I know it's technical and there are lots of political, legal, and other constraints, financial constraints, and we probably won't chart the option here today. But one of those options that are being discussed, banking, insurance, capital markets, abilities, etc., etc. Is it going to happen? Is it going to be happening in time?
I think this is typically an issue where the political will is decisive, and I sense in the course of these meetings we have had in the IMF now in these last and previously in the European context, I feel that there is an increasing political will and recognition that we have to get more impact out of the EFSF. And then, as you said, it's a technical issue and a legal issue, financial issue, how you do that. In fact, I was glad to listen to George, who reflected these options. This is one of the virtues of this kind of meetings, that you can listen to wiser people than yourself, and you can learn, and you can take something home from these meetings. One thing I take home from here is that we have actually several options which we will further study, and we will do that. In fact, we are doing that already with the member states of the Eurozone.
Right, that's very interesting. So now I'd like to open. There's a question. The first gentleman was over there, then it's Sharon Bowles, and then the microphone.
Atul Singh, I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Fair Observer, a new journal that analyzes issues of global significance. So my question is, you have the whole of Southern Europe, which has borrowed too much and taken too much debt. Creditors have lent without due diligence, often German, French banks that are overexposed. And the solution is throw more debt and kick the can down the road and assume that Greece or Portugal will grow itself out of this crisis and this will be resolved. Now, as Mr. Gao pointed out, it's unlikely that Southern Europe, given its culture, given its loss of confidence, is going to grow itself out of the crisis. So isn't the solution not throwing good money after bad, but the solution acknowledging that there's no alternative but to restructure debt, but to have haircuts and confront the issue head on.
To which member of the panel have you?
Everyone, including you.
Well, as a moderator, I can reserve the right to pass this on. Who would like to take this one on? Should Greece default? That question that I didn't dare ask. Olli, what do you think?
Well, our view is that, and this is a very serious matter, of course, is that Greece should not and will not face a default. And what we are doing now is that we are working with Greece in order to help Greece reform its economy and its society to reach a primary structural surplus, which is of course essential because Greece will have to start earning more than it consumes. And we are working together with the IMF and the ECB, and the next disbursement will be discussed very shortly. I assume that we can take a decision by mid-October on the condition that Greece will meet all the conditions related to fiscal targets and structural reforms that we have set for Greece. And I would also like to remind everybody that, in fact, as part of the next phase concerning Greece, there is a significant operation of private sector involvement involving a voluntary rollover of debt and debt exchange. That's the way we see is best for Greece and best for Europe, and the way to avoid any Lehman-type catastrophe on the European soil.
George.
By the way, one point, this cultural explanation, I'm not very keen on or fond of that, and I think it's not always valid. I come from Northern Europe, and I must say that explaining Europe's developments on the basis of cultural explanations is not exactly the right one. If you take the Nordic countries in the 1980s, for instance, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, 80s and 90s. Denmark was in the early 80s called the sick man of Europe, and Sweden and Finland faced huge fiscal problems, overall economic problems in the late 80s and 90s. They were able to overcome that by restoring their structural competitiveness and investing in education and innovation. And I believe that if the Nordics could do it, also Southern Europe can do it with right policies and strong determination.
I'll just take off on what Olli said. You know, if you go back a bit, Ibn Khaldun, the great Arab historian, wrote that he would never imagine that the people living in north of the Mediterranean would ever develop because it was far too cold, and they couldn't ever be productive. So I think these cultural theories of development don't ever get you very far. But on your wider point of is pouring more financing into these countries worth it? It's important to remember that we've had some very recent successes in Europe. Iceland has adjusted very successfully. Ireland seems to be on a path of success. Several of the Baltic countries had massive shocks early in the financial crisis, and they've recovered very well. So I think having a sort of broad brush blanket, all of these adjustment and reform programs in Europe have failed is far too simplistic.
Okay, I'd like to, it's quite desperate to get some contradiction here, actually. George, I'm hoping you agree with the view that Greece...
Look, I think Greece will do everything it can to avoid default. But realistically, it may not be able to. I mean, for the first year or so, the support that Greece got was at penalty interest rates. So the debt kept on mounting, and it's inevitably approach 200%. And that's it may just simply not be possible to avoid some form of organization which, if it can be properly managed, may be short of default. It could be a a voluntary reorganization, quotation mark. However, it's very important from the point of view of reassuring the markets that the possibility of a default is prepared for, that the rest of Europe is ring-fenced, and that the arrangements are made to protect the banking system. And that doesn't mean that Greece is being pushed into default. It's just that to reassure the markets, realistically, this possibility cannot be excluded.
Sharon Bowles, please.
Can you hear me? Right, that's
Yes.
better. Sharon Bowles, Chair of the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee of the European Parliament. It seems to me that we've actually been a little bit better at thinking of the long-term solutions and the inevitable ever closer fiscal union and so forth than in the firefight. And in the firefight and on the EFSF, it won't come as any surprise to Ollie to hear me say it has to be boosted. Think big. On that and the banking recapitalisation, and one other message, get it done or else. But when we're looking at the longer term growth that we're going to need to back up all of these plans, it's going to depend very much on the single market. And the single market is something that is an EU brand of 27 and not an EU brand of 17. And as we go towards these closer Eurozone governance and fiscal plans, how are we going to deal with potential spillover to the non-Eurozone? In the new legislative package dealing with budgets, we recognise spillover and account is taken of it. And this is potentially going to be a major problem in the future, because especially those who are bound to join the Eurozone are going to be bound by rules in which maybe they are not going to share. And of course, as with budgets, there could be a lot of spillover to everybody.
Okay, thank you. That was a comment, not a question, I suspect.
Well, I think it's a question to the panel as to how they think it can be dealt with.
Okay. Anyone like to take this one on?
I think Sharon is touching an extremely important issue, and I see that we have to, especially as regards the single market legislation, we have to preserve the unity of European Union, and we have to do everything that we can in the context of EU 27, and only what is necessary we do in the context of the Eurozone. And that's been the principle of the reform of the legislative reform of economic governance, which you have navigated through in the European Parliament, of which I'm extremely grateful. And in fact, I have to tell you that next week, I trust Sharon Bowles will have a very high moment because the European Parliament should adopt the legislative package of 6 pieces of legislation of reinforcing economic governance, which is an extremely important reform in its own right to reinforce fiscal discipline in Europe and help addressing macroeconomic imbalances. And it is also the necessary foundation for further steps in reinforcing economic governance.
Peter?
Wolfgang, if I'm allowed a comment, it relates to what Sharon has just said. If I understood you correctly, Sharon, that we have been better at designing the long-run solution, which involves fiscal union and more political union, than we have been at firefighting. With all due respect, I disagree, because I don't think that it is enough simply to say that we will have more fiscal union and more political union. We will have to specify that sufficiently clearly